section of the community. How is the good society going to be inclusive in terms of environmental justice?
Okay, and the last question before we go to panel, lady here.
Kat Wall from LSE Global Governance. In order to ensure sustainability of the planet, of food, of water, of the environment, of energy resources, we have to look beyond our borders to a much greater extent than almost in any other issue, perhaps besides from the economy. So my question to the panel is, how do we look to build a good, a green and a global society to ensure that sustainability is actually going to be possible?
Okie dokie, we're going to open that. John's gagging to come in first, I can see, to answer the questions on that. Before we do, we're just going to do a quick go around the panel, no talking, no conferring. Polly Toynbee, who is the Shadow Environment Secretary?
Meg Hillier.
Caroline Lucas, who is the Shadow Environment Secretary in your...
Meg Hillier.
Is that who you believe it is, John? I'm just checking.
Well, you should ask me. If you were being clever, you'd say, who's the Shadow Energy and Climate Change Secretary?
Who is that?
Is it Luciana Burgess? No, it's not.
She's not, no.
Who shadows Chris Huhne?
Well, answer the question before asking more.
Don't know.
Ruth, who do you think? Who is the... Chuka, can you tell us who the two people who hold Shadow Energy and Climate?
I meant to say Mary Cray.
I know, but you're both wrong, so go on, Chuka.
The Shadow Environment Secretary is Mary Cray. The Shadow Energy Secretary is Meg Hillier.
Well done. Well done. Two well-known individuals. John.
Sorry.
Well, a lot of those questions were huge. It was sort of, what kind of revolution are we going to have and how far is it going to reach? They're very, very difficult questions to answer.
You've got a minute 30.
That's a relief. I heard a couple of phrases, and I know why we talk about a better capitalism and making capitalism better, but the more I've thought about life after the crash, the more I don't necessarily... I mean, I don't want to sound like a trot or a Marxist, because I'm not, but I am sort of going back to the source in my reading a hell of a lot at the moment. I'm going back to Karl Marx and the people who developed his thought in the early 20th century, because it strikes me that, particularly in the context of climate change, it's the imperatives that lie at the center of our economy which are leading to us moving at speed towards this car crash, you know, and the left has to... It's a cheap point, really, but how the left can sort of move beyond the conversation whereby the only thing that really counts is economic growth, you know. And you go to gatherings like this and a few people talk about the poverty of growthism on the fringes and it never really seems to go anywhere, and it strikes me that's becoming more and more important. You know, if we leave the model of capitalism we've got to its own devices, it will fail us in one crucial way, and that's to do with coal. Right? I go on about coal all the time. This is going to make me unpopular, and I worry at these things. They get a bit too comfy. I'm in favour of nuclear power for the same reason that James Lovelock is and George Monbiot is, because it strikes me as the one viable way we might be able to avoid the catastrophe that's coming. We can get into a huge... not in Britain, there's not much of it around, you may have noticed. But anyway, the biggest problem that we've got in the face of this catastrophe that we're moving at speed towards is not nuclear power, it's coal. And this dreadful delusion that you can somehow have clean coal. And we've talked about carbon capture and storage. The political class gets its knickers in a terrible twist about this. That technology, as far as I can tell, is going nowhere. China and India, mainland Europe, Germany will move towards coal more and more. That's part of where this busted economic system will take us, and I think we should be talking about that much more than we are.
Caroline is desperate to come in on nuclear power, but we'll hold her back for a second. Ruth Lister.
The tension between environmental and social justice is a real problem. There are no simple answers. Obviously, if there were, someone would have found them. One practical policy is insulating the housing of people on low incomes, and then you're dealing with both environmental and social justice issues, and I think addressing part of the concerns of the first questioner. And I think, but also environmental justice has to operate right from the kind of the intimate, the home, up to the global, which deals with the last question. And we have to think about global and environmental justice together, because environmental justice can't be achieved within national borders. That requires global institutions at one level, and as Neil was saying this morning, it requires how we all live our lives. And we can all, and I absolutely include myself, live in a more sustainable way than we do. So we all have a responsibility there.
Okay, Chuka.
I think the thing that I get so frustrated about is that I think we're only really going to crack I don't think I've got enough time to go into the detail of each of the points which was raised in relation to the Green Agenda, but if we are going to crack this one, we're going to have to make sure that we win popular support and make this kind of issue as relevant and as important to people in my constituency who, I mean, we're having many of my young constituents being shot and murdered at the moment. We have people who are just simply struggling to make ends meet. But actually, I mean, what I say to many of the transition town movements which have kind of sprung up in my area is, look, these are actually the very people who should be winning over to your cause, and what are you doing to speak to them? You know, the young Nigerian family that I have on, you know, the Tulsa estate, for example, not only do they have a badly insulated and structured homes, but they also have family back in Nigeria who are going to be disproportionately affected if we don't get a grip of this issue. And yet for them, it isn't a priority. And I don't actually think the Green Movement is really connecting to them either, when actually I think there's a huge there's a huge opportunity to do that. I accept my share of responsibility on that too, because unless we actually push this up the agenda and, you know, you make it a number one political issue in the way that the economy, health, education is, then I can't really see us pushing the urgency of the issue so that the, decision makers actually radically produce transformative change on this front.
Okay, Polly Toynbee.
Well, I find it alarming, and I realise I'm part of this as well, that the extent to which climate change has simply fallen off the agenda. Yeah. If I think about how in this country, if I think about how much we discussed it a few years ago before the crash, the extent to which we've simply put it aside, and particularly perhaps in the last year, facing a government that is causing such massive and terrifying social destruction, such grotesque inequality as we will have by the end of this Parliament, so much worse, being done in front of our eyes on purpose by the people we can see. It's very much harder when you've got your enemy right there in your sights doing something particularly dreadful to say, but we still have this much bigger, much more serious, more long-term, but much more diffuse problem where there's a less clear, obvious single enemy. And I think we just have to keep reminding or being reminded that it's the big one. It is the one that matters. It's the one that's going to kill us all and our grandchildren. And we have to get back into thinking seriously about it. I think the answer is to bring them together in a green growth program. That is the only hope. People have mentioned insulation, which is terrific because it hires huge numbers of people and you can quickly train and hire a lot of long-term unemployed people. But, wave and solar and wind. And I think you can revive the idea of what an economic benefit it would be, even if it's a big outlay at first, to make this country self-sufficient in energy.
Okay.
And I would, I'm afraid, say that includes nuclear too. Sorry, Caroline.
Caroline, Lucas, you're not connected with the Green Movement, says Chuka. You need to sign up for nuclear power, say John and Polly.
How long have I got?
2 minutes.
Someone said that there's no such thing as clean coal, and that's certainly true, but there's certainly nothing as such as clean nuclear either, and I think we have to really nail the lie that nuclear is anyway clean. And the bottom line is that we simply don't need nuclear power. The government is planning to build 10 new nuclear power stations. Even if they do that by 2024, which is when they plan to have them all up and running, even if they were to do that, we would save 4% of our emissions only, because nuclear provides such a tiny proportion of our overall energy needs. So if you're looking at how do we make the biggest difference, where do we put our money for the best return, it definitely isn't nuclear, irrespective of all the safety problems or all of the environmental risks and so forth. It just is not the way to put it. You put it into energy efficiency, you put it into renewables, you put it into decentralized energy, you put it in combined heat and power. Nuclear is an utter diversion at this point, and that's what makes us so cross, I think. It's not just that this is environmentalists saying we don't want more nuclear waste, which we don't, but it's just economically stupid. And if you look at the way in which this government is trying to rig the electricity market right now, with carbon floor prices fixed at a price that will generate huge windfall profits for the nuclear industry, how they tried to put it into the green energy bill that's going through the Parliament at the moment. They had a clause in there, clause 102, which thankfully, and tribute to the other MPs on the Energy Bill Committee, we managed to get rid of, but that again would have given more subsidies for nuclear. Nuclear is not viable, it is not necessary, and it is not safe.
Okay.
I can't
You've got 20 seconds.
Okay. Seriously, I want to just address two other points because they are very serious points. Well, I wanted to take up Chuka's challenge because he's right. We do need to do more to reach people living in poverty, and we do need to be able to demonstrate the green agenda, the relevance of the green agenda to them. And I would say it's only if we just unpack some of the language, if we don't talk about the environment, but we talk about, do you get healthy food for your kids? Are you able to have your kids play in the street without having, massive air pollution, which is killing people now? I think people would find that the environmental agenda. But there's one point really important, because the last thing, and I'm sorry, I always get at the end and say you cut me short. The last thing I wanted to say was about good capitalism and growth and all of this stuff, and that is the elephant in the room today. And I'm glad we've touched on it briefly. I'm grateful that John's touched on it briefly. But I think that, unfortunately, the environment is going off the agenda in this country. But if I can be a little bit critical of Compass, which I never am, it's almost falling a little bit off Compass's agenda too. There's much less focus on it this time around. And if you take what climate scientists are telling us, which is literally that the next 8 to 10 years are going to be critical in terms of whether or not we manage to get our emissions to stabilise and then to start come down in this country. If we don't, then we are really, really up shit creek. So,
okay, on shit creek, let's move forward.
But it does not compatible with capitalism.
I love the way shit creek can get applause. Chuka has to go, but I wanted to take a couple of questions before he goes. I'm going to let him answer and then go on our last section of the discussion, and before we wrap up, on the good society and how do we build it, the movement for change, community organising. We'll take 3 or 4 quick questions. Lady in the front. Is it?
Hi, Joss Bell here. It's very much a banking question, Chuka. I am involved with a campaign on the NHS, and I'm also a disability campaigner for welfare reform. One of the things that I've come across is that the banks, not only are they loath to lend out money to people for mortgages per se, but if one is disabled, they're actually discriminatory in terms of the way they assess income against capacity to pay, which is massively reducing people's chances of retaining a home or downsizing. But in terms of building a good society, housing being so important to everybody, is that something you could maybe do something about?
Okay, we'll try and fit that in. Can we take some questions on the subject of community, or how do we build a good society? Gentleman there on the end with his hand up with the beard, and then the guy in front of him to the left. Very briefly, please.
There are too many people in this country who are not working for one reason or another. Neither party, main party, or 3, has done anything to get those people to work. We have got to get them to work.
Okay.
Let's try the panel
third time
think.
lucky. Let's try. Can we ask, is there anyone who's got anything about building a movement for the good society, about community organising, changing your parties? Go for it.
I think this is relevant. One of the aspects of a good society is that people have decent pensions. I'm going to go on strike on Thursday. Is any member of the panel going to persuade me not to?
He was turning into your comedian, but he brought it back to the subject. I like it. We'll take one more question. You've already asked a question. So is there a woman who'd like to ask a question? I can't see a woman who wants to ask a question. Oh, go on then. A woman near a mic. Grab a mic if you're a woman who's near a mic.
Is Ed Miliband, I'm not in the Labour Party actually, but is Ed Miliband going to rebrand the Labour Party then as building the good society? Because he needs to do that, I think. And are they going to get back their moral compass? Because then they might get people coming back in to build communities.
Okay. I'll give you the name thing. All right, Chuka, do you want to take that last couple of questions at least before you rush off? And thanks for coming.
It's good to be, and I'm sorry I have to rush off. Just in answer to that last question, look, I wouldn't for 1 minute argue we got absolutely everything right in government, all right? But I look around the area that I represent, I love and adore, and I've grown up in all my life, and I look at a lot of the things. The reason I'm going from here is because I'm going to go to a primary school to take part in their summer fair. I've already been at 3 this morning, and I saw the huge investment that went into those schools, and why that school that I'm going to, which I used to go to as a kid myself, is a hell of a lot better now